you for coming.
Thank you all for joining us. Come closer, please. Be in the photo. Be in the photo. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us, especially to our survivors and advocates who continue to raise their voices about military sexual assault at great cost to themselves. As we'll hear from our speakers today, we know far more now about the extent of the military sexual assault problem than we did a year ago. And it's clear that nothing has changed despite the military's claim that things are getting better. Our survivors still don't have the confidence they need in our broken military justice system. And until that changes, until we finally pass these bipartisan reforms, I urge everyone here to keep speaking out about this problem and demanding the change. I am now honored to introduce Samantha Jackson, an extraordinary survivor who will tell her story. Samantha, come on up.
Thank you. My name is Samantha Jackson. In 2007, I was raped by my husband at that time, an Army soldier stationed at Fort Belvoir. For over a year, I didn't know what had happened until I found a videotape of the assault on his computer. I was horrified. I reported the assault and provided the videotape to Army criminal investigators. To this day, I've never seen justice. After hearing the military misled Congress, claiming they are tougher than civilian prosecutors on sexual assault, I decided to speak out. I launched a petition urging the president to support efforts to fix the broken military justice system before he leaves office, which now has over 100,000 signatures. Today, I plan to deliver that petition to the White House. Unfortunately, this was not the only time that my ex-husband abused me. In 2006, like so many times before, my ex-husband hit me, only that time I called military police. Unfortunately, the case went nowhere. My ex-husband was older when he joined the military, and he was close with his command. The day after the physical assault, someone from my ex-husband's chain of command came to see me to warn me about the negative consequences of pressing charges. Of course, I didn't. This was the system I faced when I reported the rape 3 years later. My case is rare among sexual assault cases. I had a video of the assault where I'm clearly unconscious. The video shows me wake up and tell my ex-husband to stop and push him away, but he ignores me. During an interview with Army investigators, my ex-husband confessed to the crime. The Army investigators who worked on the case told me they thought I had a strong case. I also reported the rape to civilian authorities, but the military told the U.S. Attorney's Office that they would take action in my case. The U.S. Attorney chose not to prosecute the case and told me that they were declining to prosecute because the military would be taking action, but that never happened. When I heard about the decision, I was devastated. The investigator broke down when she told me he would not be prosecuted, and I couldn't even begin to process it. For years, I struggled to find peace with what happened to me. I tried for so long to have someone hear me and help me, but everyone told me their hands were tied by the system. 2 years ago, after watching The Invisible War and hearing so many stories like my own told by servicemen and women, I knew I had to try to get my case heard again. I reached out to Protect Our Defenders, who found me a pro bono attorney to request that the Army reopen my case. At the time, my ex-husband was in the Army Reserves and could be called back to active duty to be prosecuted. My attorney contacted the Army Command and requested that they reconsider the previous decision not to prosecute. In 2014, my attorney and I met with Army legal staff. With all the attention on military sexual assault, all the reforms, I thought things had changed. I was wrong. Rather than moving forward with prosecution, Army Command released my rapist from the reserves and gave up jurisdiction, ensuring the military could never bring him to justice. The Army confirmed this timeline in a response to a congressional inquiry by my Senator Mark Warner. In defending that decision, the Army chose once again to blame the victim implying I had lied about the rape because of a custody battle, when I had a video of the assault, and when my rapist confessed to the crime. My treatment by the military is a profound betrayal. I don't understand how the Army could fail to hold my rapist accountable not once, but twice. I don't understand how they could allow him to remain in the military after he confessed, or let him go while promising to reopen the case. It's inexcusable that his Army commander chose to ignore the evidence and instead relied on stereotypes and victim blaming to deny me justice. I've tried for so long to have someone hear me. While the military has continued to let me down, I'm so grateful to the senators here today who have stood on the side of survivors. I represent the thousands of civilian victims of military sexual assault, many of whom are military spouses who have been denied justice. I have been wronged by the same system and the same processes as they were, and change is past due. It's time for Congress and the President to finally fix the military's broken system and remove the decision to prosecute from commanders so that people like my rapist are no longer protected. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Paul.
Thank you, Samantha. William Wilberforce wrote, "Having heard all this, you may choose to look away, but you can never say again that you didn't know." He wrote these words in talking about the injustice of slavery, but I think these words are appropriate for the injustice that we're talking about. I can't look the other way when I hear a story like Samantha's, or a story like I've heard from those in the military in Kentucky who have had similar experiences. One woman from Georgetown, Kentucky, was raped, and mysteriously the rape kit disappeared, the photos disappeared, she had injuries, there were photos of her injuries, mysteriously all of this disappeared. We have 26,000 accusations of sexual misconduct, but only about 3,000 are actually being reported, much less than are reported in the private world. Some of the feeling is that people are afraid to report to their commander-in-chief or to their boss. And when Senator Gillibrand brought this bill to me and asked me if I would co-sponsor it, that was really sort of what my thinking was, is that nobody should be forced to go to their boss to report a rape. You should go to the proper authorities. And this would still all happen within the military. We're not talking about something outside the military. This would be going to military legal people like the Judge Advocate's Office or within the military. And there's a lot of evidence that it's not working the way we have, and I think it's about time we change it, and therefore I'm happy to be here to support Senator Gillibrand in this bill.
Thank you. Senator Grassley.
Iowa has about 3 million people, so I suppose proportionally we have as many or more people in the military, and we've got to do what we can to look to the future to see what we can do to make sure that we have fair treatment. With all this testimony you've heard, I don't know what one senator can add to it, but one word comes up in my mind in dealing with a lot of bureaucracies, no less the Defense Department. You tend to get intimidated by people coming to the Hill with the stars on their shoulders and their uniforms. They ought to be taught with respect, yes, but sometimes there's not enough questioning goes on in the culture of Congress, other people. But last year we were told, as Senator Gillibrand has said, that the military could take care of it, and the compromise that was adopted was enough. But we know, looking back at that there was a lot of evidence given that the military could handle this on their own that was just outright misleading. And that evidence has come to the attention of all of us at this point, and I think brings us to the point that this is something Congress has to decide, and we can't take any more words from the Defense Department that they're going to be able to handle this. And so consequently, I think the legislation that's before the Congress now has to be passed. It came close last time, and now we got to get it over the goal line and get it to be law because we've been misled, and all these promises haven't proven. It's a culture. We'll take care of it, but they don't take care of it. Congress has to take care of it. Congress listened to the people that made promises before. Those promises haven't been kept, and consequently, that's why we're here again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Senator Blumenthal, go ahead.
I want to begin by thanking Senator Gillibrand for being so steadfast and unwavering and persevering in this cause. She gives perseverance a new meaning when it comes to combating military sexual assault. So thank you so much to Senator Gillibrand for championing this cause and bringing us together again. I want to thank our colleagues, Senator Grassley and Senator Paul, for their leadership and making this cause truly bipartisan. There's nothing Republican or Democratic about a rape. There's nothing partisan, one way or the other, about sexual assault. And there's nothing military about it either. It pervades the civilian world as much as the military, and the system for prosecuting it in the civilian world still has flaws that need to be corrected. In fact, just yesterday, we voted on a bill, and I was very proud to help lead it with Senators Leahy and Shaheen, to provide more rights to survivors of sexual assault in the civilian world. And just to be clear, the proposal we're making does not take away from the military its ability to prosecute and punish sexual assault. It simply says that there ought to be trained, experienced prosecutors to do that job, and that sexual assault survivors should not be required to go through the chain of command to seek a remedy. And that's the lesson of Samantha Jackson's experience. If you recall, her first experience in trying to report the sexual assault was through the chain of command, and she was discouraged by the chain of command from proceeding forward. So there's a system here that has proved flawed, and even as we waited for the evidence, it has shown that the reforms and changes made so far simply have not been sufficient. That's why we're here today, to say, with the 100,000 people who are petitioning the executive branch, that Congress must and will act to make this system fairer and more responsible and more just. Let me just conclude by saying, for most of my career, I was a law enforcer. I was the United States Attorney for Connecticut for 4.5 years, and then Attorney General of my state, Connecticut, for 20 years. Prosecuting is not something that's taught in law school. It can't be taught in a 4-month course. It's the product of experience. It requires training. It's a profession. And that's why the military justice system needs trained professional prosecutors to do this extraordinarily difficult kind of case. These cases are challenging, no question about it. And the military needs and deserves the kind of prosecuting that this measure would provide for the sake of the survivors, but also the military itself, because we have the greatest, strongest military and the best leadership in the world. They should be doing what they do best, which is performing as military commanders, as leaders of our trained and excellent military personnel, rather than being dragged into the role of making prosecutorial decisions that are better done by trained, experienced professionals. So thank you again to Senator Gillibrand.
Thanks. Thanks so much. Macy? Senator Hirono.
Thank you. The tragedy and crime of sexual assault in the military continues, and therefore we, in a very bipartisan and obviously ideologically diverse way, stand with Senator Gillibrand, going on 3 years now, to call for the kinds of appropriate changes to the Code of Military Justice so that these crimes can be appropriately investigated and prosecuted. I can add nothing further than to say that we must never forget the thousands of people, both in our military and outside of our military, who have suffered these crimes. And to listen to Samantha and the other people who have experienced these assaults is very, it allows us to continue to focus, because these crimes continue. So we must continue to be the voices and advocates for the kind of changes that we need to make to our Code of Military Justice. And I also stand to thank Senator Gillibrand for keeping us on course year after year, and we're going to keep doing it until it gets done. Thank you.
Well said, Maisie. Our next speaker is Colonel Don Christensen, retired former Air Force Chief Prosecutor and President of Protect Our Defenders.
Thank you, Senator. Excuse me. Thank you, Senator Gillibrand, and the rest of the senators who are showing such great bipartisan leadership. The last 4 years of my career, I had the honor of leading a team of 20 highly skilled Air Force prosecutors. These men and women were dedicated to representing the American people and bringing justice to those who were sexually abused. They made exceptional sacrifices to ensure that every case they prosecuted was done to the best of their ability. I made sure that they had the very best training, whether it was from civilians or military, so that they could be the best litigators. I was proud to have served with this team of litigators, and I know that survivors were comforted having these dedicated men and women in their corner. Sadly, these outstanding trial attorneys, who have the very best understanding of the complexity of prosecuting sexual assault, rape, and other serious crimes, are not the ones who make the prosecution decisions in the military. Instead, the military places that in the hands of commanders who have virtually no legal training and obviously no prosecution experience. Senator Gillibrand believes it is time to look to the experts that each branch of the service has developed, yet refuses to empower to make prosecution decisions. This common sense reform takes advantage of the knowledge and the talent of some of the very best prosecutors this country has to offer. Justice is too complex, and the consequences for victims of those accused of crimes are too serious to continue to be controlled by legal amateurs. The military has posed the will of the majority of the Senate by claiming commanders will solve the military sexual assault crisis. Commanders have been in charge of the military justice system since 1775. Commanders have been in charge of the military justice system since the first sexual assault scandal of Tailhook in 1991. And they continued to be in control during the subsequent scandals such as the Aberdeen Proving Grounds, the Air Force Academy, and Lackland. If commanders are truly the answer, then why have they failed so miserably for so long? Last month, a report by Protect Our Defenders and an investigation by the Associated Press demonstrated that the military had misled Congress in order to retain control of a system that they have utterly failed in managing. To deflect attention from these failures, the military falsely claimed commanders had insisted that 93 cases go to trial when a civilian prosecutor had refused to take the case. That was utterly false. It is for these reasons, in her own story, that Samantha had led a petition drive calling on the president to reform the military's criminal justice system and to investigate the false testimony. Today, Samantha and Protect Our Defenders were delivering over 100,000 signatures calling on the president to declare his support for an impartial justice system and a professional justice system. It is time for America's military to have an impartial, effective system of justice where prosecution decisions are based upon the law and the facts instead of the whims of an often conflicted commander. I stand in support of Senator Gillibrand and the other majority of the United States Senate who want to bring justice to our service members. They want to ensure our service members have a justice system that is equal to the sacrifice they make every day. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Judy Patterson, the CEO of Service Women's Action Network.
Thank you, Senator, for your leadership and for the opportunity to speak on behalf of servicewomen past, present, and future. Sexual assault and harassment remains one of the greatest internal threats to military readiness, good order, and discipline. Every day, unfortunately, SWAN receives the same heartbreaking calls and emails, like we've heard from Samantha, from servicewomen who've experienced the mental and physical anguish of sexual assault. These women contact SWAN because they feel they have nowhere else to turn for justice. All too often, their comrades in arms committed the assault, betraying their trust and compounding the moral injury. Worse, these women frequently report that they do not feel that their commanders have their best interests at heart and believe they've been retaliated against for reporting their assaults. SWAN firmly believes that taking sexual assault cases out of the hands of commanders for prosecution is a necessary step to ensure due process and prevent retaliation against victims. The Service Women's Action Network supports Senator Gillibrand's efforts to reform the military legal justice system to ensure our military is capable of defending our nation when we need them most. We strongly urge Congress to support the passage of the 2016 Military Justice Improvement Act to rebuild trust among service members and ensure justice for sexual assault survivors. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Judy. Our next speaker is Dr. Tom Berger, Executive Director of Vietnam Veterans of America Veterans Health Council.
Thank you, Senator. We at Vietnam Veterans of America have grown tired of hearing from the Department of Defense that it has zero tolerance towards military sexual trauma in the ranks. MST is slowly eroding the unity of the force, its mission capacity, our service members' trust in each other, and the honor of all those who serve our nation honorably. It's been swept under the rug and hidden away far too long, and the price has been paid by thousands upon thousands of our military troops. It's not subsided, and it won't go away until all aspects of the system that touches it are identified and dissected. Changes are necessary to long-standing procedures, regulations, and legal systems. Leadership must be held accountable at every level of the command structure. There must be a total buy-in. Otherwise, it's a waste of time and energy at the expense of the victims. Senator Gillibrand's bill would ensure victims a better opportunity to seek justice, and it's well past time for this reform to become law. The MJIA would remove prosecution of military sexual violence cases out of the chain of command and allow for prosecution to be led by experienced legal professionals. Just last month, we learned that nearly 3 years ago, in an attempt to derail MJIA legislation proposed by Senator Gillibrand, a now retired U.S. naval officer testified before the U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee about what would happen if the military's chain of command was bypassed in its decisions about whether to pursue criminal charges in sexual assault cases. Citing information allegedly compiled by military personnel, the Admiral claimed that civilian prosecutors are less willing to take on such cases than our military officials, and that removing the decision-making process from the military chain of command would result in fewer sexual assault cases being prosecuted. Unfortunately, this testimony was misleading and deceptive. It's totally unacceptable to have Pentagon leaders offer deceptive information to members of Congress, and leaders of the armed forces must be held accountable for spinning this information and that way to mislead Congress. Senator Gillibrand's bill would ensure victims a better opportunity to seek justice, and it's well past time for this reform to become law. VVA calls on Congress to pass this legislation and VVA stands in solidarity with Senator Gillibrand on the MJIA. Thank you, Senator.
Our last speaker is Thomas Porter, the Legislative Director of IAVA, the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. And Senator Gillibrand, thank you very much for your commitment, your perseverance, and your leadership on this issue. And Ms. Jackson, thank you for being here to tell your powerful story. I'm pleased to be here on behalf of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America's 425,000 members, many of which have been much closer to this problem than they would have liked. I'm also here as an Afghanistan veteran, a husband, a father of small daughters, who I would like to feel comfortable in recommending military service to when the time comes. IAVA finds it unacceptable that we are once again discussing the fact that not enough is being done to protect survivors of military sexual trauma or to prevent these crimes from happening in the first place. Notably, IAVA's most recent member survey, which we released publicly just a couple of hours ago downtown, over 60% of both men and women respondents who reported an incident of MST said they experienced retaliation after reporting it. Also, notably, 73% of men and 53% of women respondents don't believe DoD is doing enough to address MST. Also, less than half of women and men survivors of MST have reported it. It's appalling if those who are tasked with protecting our freedoms don't feel safe in doing their jobs and reporting crimes. The time to act on the Military Justice Improvement Act is now. Thank you.
We're happy to answer any on-topic questions you can ask of any of us. Go ahead.
Senator, do you have a commitment that your legislation is going to be taken up as an amendment to the NDAA this week or whenever it comes up on the floor?
I do.
And what is your sense? Are you going to need 60 votes again this time?
Yes.
How many do you have right now?
We know of the 50 we had last time, and hopefully we'll have more.
Hopefully we'll have more. Are there any senators you've been talking to who you think are close to moving, either new senators who voted against it first time out?
I've made an attempt to talk to all senators who voted against this amendment last time so that I could give them new information, evidence of misleading Congress, as well as some of the recent reports that have been published that show a failure in the system that continues to not put survivors first, and retaliation rates that have not changed. We're still at 62% retaliation rate. I think many senators that we've spoken to are concerned, deeply concerned about the attempt to mislead Congress, deeply concerned that numbers remain unchanged, deeply concerned that our conviction rate is stalled. The military continues to say, we got this, we got this. Well, it's not shown in the data. It's not shown in the survivor's testimony. It's not shown in seeing justice being done. So despite their claims that things are getting better, that is not what the evidence tells us, and that's not what any of the research that's been done in the last year tells us.
How confident are you that you're going to get to 60?
I'm very hopeful because this type of information is alarming.
And further to that, have you spoken specifically to Senator John McCain and also on the House side? Have you gotten any reactions?
I've spoken to John McCain many times about this issue. I have not spoken to House members yet. No.
Several of your speakers mentioned the White House. Are you frustrated that the White House has stayed on the fence on this issue?
I'm very frustrated with the White House. Go ahead. Well, I think what we've discussed today is this is a pervasive problem regardless of where it happens. It's a problem throughout the United States. It's a problem throughout the military. It's a problem throughout civilian society. And what upsets me the most is that the military have not created a justice system that is worthy of the support of men and women who will sacrifice their lives for this country. It is a system that is rife with bias, lack of transparency, and no accountability. And they have not improved the system given all the reforms we put in place. There's an unwillingness by the command to actually prosecute these cases and convict serious felons.
What more would you like to see done from the White House, and to whom specifically have you been communicating your frustration?
I've spoken to the president directly about this issue, and what I'm frustrated about is he is the commander-in-chief, so he could change this rule all by himself. And then if he did say the decisions should be no longer made by the chain of command, but by trained military prosecutors, we would then pass the legislation to support that decision, as we did a couple of years ago when the president decided we should not give commanders the ability to overturn jury verdicts. And so we believe the president should show leadership here, and when he does, we will pass our legislation to support it. I have spoken to Senator McCaskill, and I do not know what she will do, so you should ask her. Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much.
Testimony makes a difference every time. Thank you, Maisie, so
Yeah,
much.
you know,
You and I should go talk to
you know,
him.
you can't just
Or just let go.
say, I'm gonna take this, even as a prosecutor.
Let's think
I
about
won't
that.
do
Let's think
sexual
about that.
assault cases.
And maybe, or maybe go to talk to, go to Warren. They still have 10 Democrats. Tim Kaine. Tim's not, they don't list Jeff. So let's think about who you like the most.
Thank you so much. Great job.
Thanks, Don. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate it.